Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Branded. I'm your host, Sarah. I want to start this episode a little differently than usual. Instead of a reframe or a diagnosis or a pattern, I want to start with something a little more personal. And I want to be honest with you in a way that I think you deserve. So, not that long ago, my business was in a season where I was performing a version of growth that I actually wasn't in. And I don't mean that in like a fake it till you make it kind of way. I was genuinely confused about where I was. I was creating content about momentum when what I actually needed was consolidation. I was talking about scaling when what I actually needed was to slow down and look really honestly at what I built. I was showing up like someone in this expansion season when privately I was in something that felt a lot more like the in between. And every decision I made from that confusion cost me something. But here's something I've come to understand that nobody really talks about in the creating content for a business space. How you perform online doesn't usually reflect the actual season you're in. Performing online is how you show up in your content. It's how you talk about your business publicly, in the energy that you project on stories and in emails and on podcasts. And it usually lands somewhere on the spectrum of growth, momentum, building, expanding, because that's the language of the business content world. That's what gets engagement. That's what sounds like success. But the season you're actually in is much quieter than that and much more honest. It's also harder to name out loud because naming it feels like admitting something you're not sure that you're allowed to admit. Because maybe you're in a consolidation season where the priority isn't adding more, but finally finishing what's already there. Where the right move is to stop launching and start cleaning up the infrastructure that's been holding everything together with good intentions, but your manual efforts. Maybe you're in a questioning season where the offer that worked 3 years ago is starting to feel slightly misaligned with where you actually want to go, where you're not sure if the pivot you keep thinking about is intuition or avoidance, where the business is technically fine, yet something about it feels like it's asking for a different version of you. Maybe you're in a rebuilding season where the visible stuff looks polished, but the invisible stuff reflects a version of the business you've totally outgrown, where you know the work that needs to happen, but you keep finding reasons to do everything else first. Or maybe you are genuinely in a growth season, but you're so used to performing the idea of growth that you've stopped being able to tell the difference between the real thing and the habit of simply saying you're in that season. And not knowing what season your business is in is way more expensive than it looks. When you make decisions from a place of performing rather than where you actually are, those decisions usually don't fit. And decisions that don't fit create friction that's really hard to diagnose because there's not like an obvious source. So maybe you launch from a growth season posture when you're actually in a consolidation season. So the launch happens, the revenue's coming in, but you immediately feel the weight of it because the infrastructure underneath the offer isn't solid enough to handle the volume without you stepping in to hold it all together. So you work harder and you attribute that heaviness of the launch, you know, oh, it was just the launch happening, instead of recognizing that perhaps the misalignment between what you're performing and where you actually are has a gap. You create content with an air of momentum when you're actually in a questioning season. So the content is good, people respond to it, but something about creating it feels slightly hollow because you're describing an energy that you don't fully embody. And that hollowness shows up subtly in the work, even if you can't see it for yourself. You make investments to continue expansion, but you're actually in a rebuilding season. So you hire before your systems are ready to support someone else. You add tools before the existing tools are being used properly. You spend money on visibility before the thing that you're actually making visible is fully solid. And the investments don't return what they should because the foundation they're sitting on wasn't ready for them. None of that's failure, but all of it is expensive. And most of it is invisible because the real cost is not always financial. Sometimes it's the quality of your attention. Sometimes it's the energy you spend managing consequences that just didn't need to exist. Sometimes it's the 6 months you spend building in the wrong direction because you're performing instead of living in the season you're actually in. So, how do we figure out which season we're in? For me, it was a period of time where I kept launching, not because the business demanded it, but because launching felt like the thing you do when you're a founder who has their shit together. It felt like momentum, it felt like growth. And from the outside, it probably looked that way too. But underneath every launch, there was a list of things that I knew just weren't right. Pages that need to be rebuilt, emails that were outdated, automations that I was compensating for because I didn't trust them, and a back end system that technically worked, but only because I was like watching it. So I kept launching anyways, because stopping to fix any of these things felt like going backwards. It felt like admitting that what I'd built wasn't solid, not in the way I was pretending it to be. It started to feel like the opposite of growth, honestly. And that's because I was actually in a season of consolidation. My business was asking me to stop adding and start finishing, to stop building out and start building properly, to invest the energy I was spending on new launches into making what already existed work the way it's supposed to. But I didn't do that. Not right away, at least. I kept performing as if I was in a growth season for longer than I should have because I didn't have language for the thing I was actually experiencing. I just knew that something felt off and I kept trying to fix it with more activity and more visibility. And when what I really needed was more honesty. So finally, I decided to approach my business differently by asking myself one simple question anytime I needed to make a decision. Is this what the business actually needs right now? Or is this what someone in a growth season would do? And the honest answer, more times than I'm comfortable admitting, was to recognize that a season of growth, just like springtime, it doesn't last forever. It shouldn't last forever. A season of consolidation brings space so we can grow. A season of rebuilding brings structure so we can grow. A season of questioning brings clarity so we can grow. So let's break this down a little further. A consolidation season is when your business has grown faster than its systems and the priority shifts to finishing what's already there rather than adding something new. When your most valuable work is structural rather than visible, when the answer to almost every opportunity is not yet because the foundation isn't ready for it yet. That's a consolidation season. A questioning season is when something about your current direction is asking to be examined. Not like in crisis mode, just a genuine reckoning of whether the thing you've been building is still the right thing for you, whether the offer still fits, whether the positioning still reflects where you are, whether the vision that got you here is the same one that should carry you forward. A rebuilding season is when you know something needs to change and you're in the process of changing it. Nothing super dramatic, just honesty. Closing the tabs that you've been avoiding, making decisions you've been postponing, building the version of the business that matches the level you're actually operating at. And a growth season is when the foundation is solid enough to build on, when adding more actually makes sense, when visibility and volume and expansion are the right investments because what you're adding to them is ready for them. Most founders are encouraged to stay in this growth season as if growth is the only legitimate season and everything else is just a detour from the main event. But consolidation and questioning and rebuilding, these are not detours. They are the work that makes growth sustainable instead of exhausting. So, what season are you actually in right now? Not what season you're posting about on Instagram, not what season makes you sound like you have momentum, not what season you think you should be in based on how long you've been in business or how much revenue you're generating or what everyone else seems to be doing. The one you're actually in, the one that's honest, the one that matches the private reality of what the business is asking of you right now and what you actually have the capacity to give it. Because here's what I've come to know. The season you're actually in is always the right place to be. It's not a step backwards. It's simply where you are. And making decisions from where you actually are is always going to produce better results than making decisions from where you think you should be. The founder who knows that she's in a consolidation season and is making her decisions accordingly is in a fundamentally different position than the founder who is in a consolidation season but performing as if in a growth season and wondering why nothing's gaining traction. One of them is working with reality, the other is working against it. And working against reality is expensive in ways that are very hard to trace back to their source. So name it for yourself. Whatever season you're actually in right now, say it out loud if you need to, write it down, text a friend who will understand what you're talking about. Not because naming it fixes anything, but because decisions from a clearly named reality, they're different from making decisions while pretending you're somewhere else. And right now, this show's in a season of honesty. We're talking real numbers, real decisions, real cost, the stuff that usually stays private, that a lot of founders aren't openly expressing. So we're going to name where we actually are before we go anywhere else. I hope you enjoyed this week's episode. Share it with a founder who feels like they're always performing for this growth season that maybe they're not actually in. I'm sure she knows exactly who she is, and I'm sure she'll be very grateful that you thought of her. I hope you have a fabulous week. I'll see you next week for a brand new episode. Bye, y'all.